Today we are starting a new, chapter, if you will, in this particular class. We are going to be looking at the topic of wisdom over the next, I don't know how many weeks or months. Essentially what this came from is I had the opportunity to at least start a 31-day Proverbs challenge, and I'm not doing well with it. But the idea is that, and maybe you've heard this advice before. Where's a good place where you can start reading your Bible? Well, you just pick up your Bible, you turn to the book of Proverbs, and whatever day of the month it is, that's the chapter, because they're sort of standalone, and that's what I intend this class to be. Is standalone. So if you can be here 1 week, great. If you miss, you're not out anything. You just pick up where you left off. So we're going to be looking at this concept, at this topic of wisdom, and today is Wisdom 101. We're going to be doing that, and starting next week, we're going to go into into the book of Proverbs, and we're going to start to look at some of those things a little more closely. Some weeks we may do a couple of verses, some weeks we may do a couple of chapters. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we're going to be focusing on wisdom here for the next period of time. Now, as I say wisdom, I think it's important that we recognize that this is a big topic, right? It's a big topic. There's a lot of things that we can become wise about. And one of the first things that we need to be aware of is that there is a difference between worldly wisdom and godly wisdom. All right, and just as our first step, I just want you to understand that these are not necessarily equal. There may be some overlap, but there may also be there may be some situations where they go in dramatically different directions. So I just want us to be alert to that, because people will share some really good bits of worldly wisdom, which we could take and we could adopt those things, and it may not be actually what's God's intent is. A lot of godly wisdom may actually prove to be counterintuitive to what worldly wisdom is. So I just give you that as a sort of a foundational piece as we get started in this. I will also tell you this, as we go through this study, while the heavy lifting will most likely be done in the book of Proverbs, there are tons of other bits of wisdom throughout the Bible that we will be looking at. And we need to recognize that by improving our wisdom, we can become better disciples. And by improving our wisdom, it will help us to disciple others better. Because as the intent of all of our Bible classes have been, especially of the last several years, it has been an intense focus on how do we help people move to the upper room. It's not that just you're maintaining. You want to be moving up. You want to be moving closer to what Jesus would have us be. So with that. I'm already way off my notes to do that. And as we talk about wisdom, we will not be surprised that King Solomon, is going to be somebody that we talk about a time or two as we go through this study. But I think we would recognize that. No matter where we come from and no matter where we are intending to go, if we improve our wisdom, it should help us along the way. So that's really the background to what we're looking at. So let's get started by looking at the difference between godly and worldly wisdom. Now, worldly wisdom is everywhere. There's all sorts of books, there's all sorts of podcasts, there's all sorts of memes. I mean, who else likes social media memes? Anybody? A couple of you? Instagram Reels. Anybody ever sent anybody an Instagram Reel? No, like, yes, come on, like, sometimes they're not quite as full of wisdom. Sometimes you just laugh at some disaster that you watch unfold. The idea of these things is to often focus on self-interest. Self-interest, like, how does this help you? Worldly wisdom is focused on you. How do you get some benefit from whatever situation you find yourself in? That's really the key of what worldly wisdom is it gives some benefit to you. So I'm going to give you 5 examples of worldly wisdom. Now, and tell me if you've ever heard any of these before. Have you ever heard anybody, and this is worldly wisdom, say something to the effect of follow your heart? Anybody heard that one? Anybody ever said that one? Yeah, we probably have. Like, we've watched the fairy tales, right? We've seen Cinderella or Snow White. We've seen these stories, right? Follow your heart. And the idea is that we should trust our emotions and our personal desires above all else in making a decision, right? How about this one? Might makes right. Anybody ever heard that one? Has anybody ever given you that counsel? Have you ever given that counsel to somebody else? Might makes right. The idea that power and strength can justify actions. That those with power will determine what the right thing to do is. I think that's the way the political system seems to be. In a very general statement, whoever's in power, they say this is the right thing that we should do, right? That's where we are. How about this one? My guess is you've heard this one before. Look out for number 1. You ever heard that one? Did I hear a chuckle? You have heard that one? Yeah, we've heard that one before. We've probably even given that counsel before, have we not? The idea is put your own interests first. Prioritize self-preservation and personal gain, right? The idea of this is that these are focused on you. This will be one. This is one that I'm positive you've heard. The ends justify the means. The ends justify the means. And the idea here is that as long as you get the right result, as long as the result is favorable, then the methods that you use do not matter. They do not matter. That's some worldly wisdom that we have. How about this one? Live your truth. Live your truth. And the idea is that truth is subjective and it's based on your individual feelings and experiences. These are all bits of worldly wisdom. We've probably heard all of these things before. Now, godly wisdom, on the other hand, it comes from a different source. We have a different source that we're looking at here. We're going to come back to these in a minute, so I'm going to turn the page here. See if I can screw this up today. If you would, turn with me to James chapter 3, verse 17. James 3:17. And is anybody going to be on digital looking this up? If you, I'm going to need some help here in a minute, okay? Those of you that use a digital Bible, I appreciate that. But James 3:17, James writes, "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere." Now that's the NIV. Does anybody else have a different translation here in the room? What do you got?
I got it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, what version do you have?
Oh, okay. Let me get one.
I have the NLT.
All right, go ahead, Jenny.
3:17.
Yep.
But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere.
Okay. So what I want you to start to hear or see with this is that sometimes you have a different translation, you get a little different words, it gives a little different flavor, perhaps it makes it a little more sticky to you with that definition. Anybody else here have a different translation? That was NLT?
Yes.
Okay. You have one, Jill?
I can do the New King James.
Yeah, go right ahead.
But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy.
That's a good one. Anybody else? So this is Pastor John's not in here. This would probably make a skin crawl if he knew I said this. So you got to keep a secret for me. But I'm going to ask if you have a digital, pull up the Message. Pull up the Message. Now the Message is not exactly a translation, it's a paraphrase, it's a whatever, but it's intended to be a more modern translation, so it's written a little bit different. And you'll also find that it's not always a verse for verse translation, right? You're not going to have word for word, you're going to get different things. But what I found with this is James 3:17 and 18. Anybody have it? You got it? Go right ahead. What?
Real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. It is gentle and reasonable, overflowing with mercy and blessings, not hot one day and cold the next, not two-faced. You can develop a healthy, robust community that lives right with God and enjoy its results only if you do the hard work of getting along with each other, treating each other with dignity and honor.
So we get a slightly different language here. It gives a slightly different flavor to what's going on. And just so you know, I used to sit down at the dining room table on a Saturday night with about 6 different translations in front of me, and I'd flip around through all of them. And Jess is shaking his head. I don't know that Trace ever took a picture of that disaster. But I had books all over the place. Now it's gone much more digital with the preparation. But I love how you can just tap on the Bible app and you can change and you can say, okay, what's King James say? What's New Living Translation say? And so I scroll through a bunch of those just to see sometimes there's some different words that'll be used there. And as we go through this study of wisdom, we'll do this probably a little bit more. Right? We'll look at some of these things because sometimes there's just a certain word that may help connect or resonate a little more closely with you. But let's think about this. James 3:17 gives us a list of what godly wisdom is like. What are some of those things that we see here? Godly wisdom, according to James, is pure. What else? Peaceable. Considerate. Submissive. Okay. Mercy How about I say merciful? Would that be all right? Full of mercy, merciful. And fruitful. How about that? There was something that came from over here. What was that? Sincere? Sincere, impartial. That's gentle. I'm running out of room here. That's great. That's great. We got these things that we're looking at. It's God's wisdom is rooted in humility, righteousness, and obedience to God. Oh, I don't know what I'm writing there. Whew. Humility, righteousness, and obedience. Humility, righteousness, and obedience. Now, here's a question for you. Can you think of a time when God's wisdom went against common sense or popular opinion? Can you think of that? Actually, we're going to look at that back here. We're going to look at this back here. So while worldly wisdom is focused on you, godly wisdom is focused on humility, obedience, and righteousness. And that may not put the focus on you, right? That there may be a disjunction there. So when the world gives you the wisdom that says follow your heart, saying trust your emotions, trust your personal desires whenever you make your decisions, God's wisdom tells us the same or something different. Very different. Very different. Jeremiah 17:9 tells us that the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? So worldly wisdom says follow your heart. Godly wisdom says seek Him. Worldly wisdom says might makes right. Might makes right. Power and strength will justify your actions. Those with power determine what's right. Is that what God's wisdom tells us? Is it the same or might it be something different? Any ideas? When we start studying wisdom, we're going to find that there is a great deal of contrast. Between the two. That may even lead to conflict between the two. But there is the contrast is this: if worldly wisdom says might makes right, godly wisdom says whoever wants to be great must become your servant. That's what Jesus told us, right? It was greatness comes from service. Not from might. Not from might. Look out for number one is what the world tells us. What's God tell us? Does He tell us that same thing, or does He tell us something different? I heard look out for others. Paul tells us, Philippians 2:3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. This says look out for number one. This says live selflessly. I could go on a whole tirade about living selflessly coaching 5th and 6th grade basketball right now. Like there's a lot of selflessness. I'm being taught a lot going through that. The ends justify the means, right? As long as you get the favorable result, the method doesn't matter. What does God say? What does God say? Oh, it does matter, right? Proverbs 21:2 says, a person may think that their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart. God weighs the heart, and integrity matters. Integrity matters. Live your truth. Truth is subjective and based on individual feelings and experiences. Is that what God tells us? Anybody want to shake their head? No, he tells us something different. He tells us something different. John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. Godly recognizes that truth is rooted in God's unchanging nature, not personal perspective. Truth is God's unchanging nature. Right? So isn't that something as we start to look at this, that there's all this wisdom out there, but we need to be able to tell the difference between worldly wisdom and godly wisdom. Now, I've been debating all morning whether to drop this one, because you may actually chase me out of the building, but there's some times that I'm reasonably sure that worldly wisdom and godly wisdom coincides, and as I look out the window, there's snow, and I was given the wisdom from my uncle many, many years ago to avoid yellow snow. So I thought that, okay. There's a reason why I didn't give that one, I guess. Okay. So anyway, but let's turn ahead. 1 Corinthians 1:25. Paul writes, for the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. The foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. We must recognize that godly wisdom is much, much, much more valuable than worldly wisdom. So to that end, I think it would be in our best interest to seek godly wisdom. That sound reasonable? That sound like a reasonable thing for us to do, to seek godly wisdom? God's foolishness is better than the best stuff that we can come up with. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? So how do we pursue wisdom? You may immediately think of James 1:5, if you want to turn to that with me. I'm sure you've heard this one before. But James tells us, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. What a simple but profound answer. Ask God for wisdom. Now, think about that for a second. James tells us that God does not withhold wisdom. He gives it freely. He gives it generously to those who ask. But it starts with us realizing, hey, I need some wisdom. I need some wisdom. Well, this is going to be probably a foundational story that we'll look at over the next many weeks, but 1 Kings chapter 3. If you want to turn there with me, 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 5 through 14. It says, "At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, 'Ask for whatever you want me to give you.' Solomon answered, 'You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and given him a son to sit on his throne this very day.'" Now I'm going to hit pause there. I'm going to give you a little bit of context. A little bit of context, right? So David is the second human king of Israel. The first was a guy named Saul. So whenever we get to Solomon, Solomon would be David's son, which is the first son to ascend to the throne. Now, what you also need to know is that Solomon, whenever he becomes king, is right around 20 years old. Now, I'm going to ask all of you, save one who has just turned 21 in this room, how smart were you at age 20? That's like, we may think we know it all, but like there's still a lot to learn. Still a lot to learn, right? Solomon would go on to say, "Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here amongst the people you have chosen, a great people too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life." Now I want you to think about that. God appears to Solomon in a dream and he says, "I'll give you anything you want." This is sort of like the genie in the lamp, right? The genie comes out, "I will grant you 3 wishes. You know, I'll give you what you want." Now, Solomon could have asked for wealth, he could have asked for power, he could have asked for long life, but what he did ask for, he didn't ask for those things. What he did say is he said, "I need to be able to lead my people well. I need wisdom. I need discernment for that." And God was pleased with that choice. And he gave Solomon wisdom. And because he had wisdom, everything else came along with it. Everything else came along with it. Now I want you to reflect on that for a moment, right? If God gave you the same offer today, anything you want, what would you ask for? Doorbell rings, phone rings, whatever, however you want to think of this. God's on the other side. Hey, what do you want today? What do you want today? What challenge are you facing in life today, and what would you ask for? Would wisdom be your first choice? Or would it be health? Would it be finances? Would it be the restoration of relationships? What would that look like for you today? See, I don't know that I'd be quite that bright to ask for wisdom. I'm afraid I would ask for something else. May ask for good looks or something like that. Who knows? But this is what I don't want you to miss this morning. God does make that same offer to us. He does make the same offer to us that he made to Solomon. Remember, James said, all we have to do is ask for wisdom, just like Solomon did. And if we pursue wisdom, we are sure to find it. Now, when you go down this path, you have to realize that that's not what the enemy wants. So the enemy is going to try to throw you off that path, right? The enemy is going to come after you. He's going to remind you of all the foolish things you have done or you have been a part with. I'm not going to make eye contact with Steve Huvis, but I'm going to put myself out there. I have done some foolish things. I have hung around with some foolish people. Steve, I don't think you've ever done that, right? I wouldn't think so. But there's somebody else in here that has. Maybe a few of us have, we found ourselves in some crazy situations, right? That's where we are. We say, And the enemy comes and says, remember these dumb things that you did? How on earth could you ever handle wisdom? He tries to convince us that somehow we are not worthy of wisdom. He may tell us that, you've got all the wisdom that you need, right? You know these things. You've got this stuff, right? But I want you to remember what Solomon's background was. When we look at this story, Solomon's just become king. But let's keep in mind what Solomon's life was really like, right? And I think this is an important thing, and this should be an encouraging thing for us today. Solomon is the son of David and anybody? Bathsheba. Now, how did that situation happen? How did that situation happen? David goes out one day, sees Bathsheba taking a bath, says, oh my. He takes an interest. He gets her pregnant. He finds out that her husband's out making battle, right? Pulls him back. But Uriah had so much integrity, had so much character that the end result is that David had to get Uriah killed on the battlefield. That's the way it was, right? David committed adultery with Bathsheba, had her husband killed, then he married her. Solomon comes from a story of sin and scandal and tragedy. I don't know exactly the right way to say this, but does anybody have sin, scandal, or tragedy in their background? I think we all do, right? And here's the amazing part. Out of that brokenness, God brought redemption. Bathsheba becomes the mother of Solomon, the king who would ask God for wisdom and who would become one of the greatest rulers in world history. Under Solomon, the kingdom of Israel had its broadest borders and its most peaceable times, right? And this should be an encouragement for all of us. No matter where we come from, no matter what garbage or nonsense or whatever we have in our past, no one is disqualified from seeking God's wisdom. No one is disqualified. God's grace covers all of it. If you would like, turn with me to the book of Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, verse 28, Paul writes, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose." Did that apply to Solomon? God use all those situations? And does that truth apply to Solomon? I think that's a truth that can apply to us as well. Solomon's story is a powerful reminder that God can bring purpose out of pain and wisdom out of brokenness. So something for you to consider this morning is, as you look at Solomon's background, as you look at God's grace in Solomon's life, does that give you any type of encouragement for your pursuit of wisdom? Does it give you any encouragement, perhaps? Maybe the encouragement is not for you. Maybe that's encouragement for somebody that you know. Is there somebody that you know that maybe comes from a situation that wisdom, God's wisdom, may have such a powerful, powerful, powerful impact on? Now, and I think this is on the other side, we started making a list. This is what James tells us is part of godly wisdom. It's pure, it's peaceable, it's gentle, it's full of mercy, it's full of good fruits, it's impartial, it's sincere. When we think about how different that is from the wisdom the world celebrates. The world often celebrates, look out for number one, win at any cost, follow your heart. But God's wisdom says, seek peace, show mercy, and be humble. And the thing about God's wisdom is that it's not always easy. It's not always easy, but it is always worth it. Exercising God's wisdom is not always easy, but it is always worth it. And I'm gonna go off my notes here, but Jesus literally executed God's wisdom. He was executed following godly wisdom. Wasn't easy, absolutely worth it. So I'm curious, as we have this list on the board, are there any of these characteristics of godly wisdom that you look at and you're like, yes, I do that well? Do you see one on here that you do well? This is a participation, and I hope everybody raises their hand that they see. Corinne sees something on here that she does well. Jill and Jenny do too. Okay, Sean might see one. This is the easy question, guys. The hard question's coming. Is there anything on here that you do well? Because here's the hard question. Is there anyone here that you don't do well? Is there any on there that you don't do well? This week, let me give you this challenge. Let me give you this challenge to pick whichever one of these and pray. Pray for the wisdom in that area. Why not take James' advice? Ask for that wisdom. Jesus tells an interesting story. The Gospel of Matthew records it. If you want to turn with me here, Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. Jesus says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." Have you heard this story before? The wise man builds his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundations on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. One of my mentors takes this story, he tells it a little different way, and it's a very impactful way, because he said that Jesus tells the story of two men that, for all intents and purposes, are otherwise equal. right? They're otherwise equal. They're both capable. They have some skill. They must be of similar strength, whatever it turns out to be, that they can build houses. The key difference between these two guys, one's wise, the other's a fool. And they get dramatically different results. Jesus says the wise builder is the one who hears his words and puts them into practice. Wisdom, when it comes down to it, is not just knowing the right thing. Wisdom also includes doing the right thing. It's about putting God's truth into action, even when it's hard, even when it doesn't make sense. So this week, as we go out, may we seek God's wisdom, may we seek God's truth, and may we live it out. And with whatever problems in life that you are facing, perhaps request the wisdom to deal with those problems as opposed to just the resolution of those problems. You see, this lesson hurt. I mean, and this is just the introduction. Like we haven't even opened up Proverbs yet. This is the introduction. Like, you know, as I was preparing this, I thought, how many middle of the nights have I spent face down on the floor with the challenges and problems that I face? I don't have a number. I'll just tell you it's a lot. How many days have I not been able to sleep real long, so I get up early in the morning and you know, I go out and I have these conversations with God, and I just say, well, like, why are you doing this? And through all that time, as I was building this out, I realized I don't know that I ever asked for wisdom. I think I asked for the problems to go away. I asked for the problems to be resolved. But I don't know that I ever asked for the wisdom to navigate the problems. And here's the thing, no matter what problems that you face today, and this won't sound real encouraging, I recognize that. I'm reasonably sure there's bigger problems down the road. Does anybody ever notice that? Have you ever noticed that as you go through life, like you're like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get through this? And then like you get through it, and somewhere down the road it's like, this is bigger. There's a bigger problem now. Does anybody notice that? I've noticed it a little bit. I'm suspicious that as I go through life, it only gets worse. That's my suspicion. And what do I need to get through those? I may need some wisdom. I may need some wisdom. So I want to encourage each of you in your own unique situations to seek wisdom this week. And over the course of the next several weeks or months or however long this is going to go, we are going to look at different bits of wisdom. I don't know that I know exactly how this is going to play out, but I do trust that we will find value as we do that. With that, I'm going to put 3 letters on the board. Based on what we have looked at today, what action will you take? What change will you make? And is there something that you learned this morning that you can teach to somebody else for your sake and theirs?